think we should really look at the root of the problem.
To uphold the public's confidence in elderly nursing homes, Chen says it's important for the Social Welfare Department and relevant stakeholders to plug any loopholes to avoid any similar incidents in the future. Legislator Tang Ka-piu, who represents the labor sector, called on the government to step up inspection of private care homes. He thinks there is a need to revise legislation as part of efforts to improve service quality. Lis Yun, TVB News.
Overseas again, the United States has formally dropped Cuba from its list of state sponsors of terrorism. The decision is another step towards restoring diplomatic ties between the two neighbors, and analysts say the move could be a game changer in U.S.-Latin American relations. The formal removal of Cuba's state sponsor of terrorism designation by the U.S. had been widely expected.
That Cuba has provided assurances that it will not support acts of international terrorism in the future, and all of this meets the requirements of the law.
The decision comes exactly 45 days after the White House informed Congress of its intent to do so. No U.S. lawmakers opposed the move. Washington put Cuba on its terrorism blacklist in 1982, accusing Havana of supporting armed guerrilla movements in Latin America. The designation placed onerous regulations on banks dealing with Cuba and exposing them to U.S. fines. A longtime analyst on U.S. relations with Latin America says the decision will help heal an old wound between the Cold War foes.
One has to understand that every country in the hemisphere, including Canada, every Latin American country, every Caribbean country, recognized Cuba.
For average Cubans, the decision is long overdue. Marvelous, says this woman. We should never have been on the list of countries that support terrorism. It's time that commercial ties and communications be open between the two countries, says this man. But not everyone approves of the U.S. decision. This Cuban-American political activist calls it a gift to the Castro brothers. The U.S. decision also lifts a ban on American economic aid, arms exports, and controls on dual-use items with military and civilian applications. But the gesture could also be a huge boost for U.S. credibility in Latin America.
And may make, or let's say reduce the volume of what remains of anti-American attitudes in Latin America.
Still, many obstacles remain before relations between the two countries can be normalized, including travel restrictions, the continuing U.S. embargo, and Cuba's human rights record.
To the migrant crisis gripping Europe, at least 17 were found dead off the coast of Libya, while about 4,000 were rescued over the past 24 hours. This, as many European states are rejecting the idea of housing their fair share of tens of thousands of asylum seekers. This is the Italian Navy conducting its latest rescue operation of migrants making the perilous Mediterranean crossing in search of a better life. Of the 4,000 migrants rounded up yesterday, 217 were rescued on this boat, but more than a dozen were found dead. In another part of the Mediterranean, this German frigate did the same. Early this morning in Greece, 7 migrants arrived in a small inflatable boat on the island of Kos. They destroyed their boat and then fled barefoot and soaking wet. In the Italian Alps, many migrants are being blocked amid tightened border controls ahead of next month's G7 summit in Germany. This one is headed to Austria despite having no contacts there.
No friend, no brother, no everything. I'm go along.
Many are discovering the grass isn't always greener on the other side.
The moment we Africa come to the Europe sides, that they really keep on respect to us. They neglect us.
Italy is clearly struggling with the massive influx. Up until May this year, more than 26,000 have been processed, on top of 170,000 last year. In Padua, protesters marched to reject catering to the migrants. The mayor of Padova says it's hard for Italians to find jobs, let alone migrants. He says housing them without employment leads to drug dealing and prostitution. Italy now bears the brunt of housing the migrants. Many EU states fear opening the floodgates will make it easy for terrorists to infiltrate. The UN Secretary General agrees.
The emergence of violent extremism is a grave threat to international peace and security.
Still, Ban insists the priority must be to save lives and provide humanitarian aid. German Chancellor Angela Merkel has promised to work with British Prime Minister David Cameron to clinch a deal on reforming the European Union that would keep Britain in the bloc. They held talks during Cameron's visit to Berlin yesterday.
What matters is the content, is the substance of what needs to change. Now, my view is clear that the substance requires changes to the treaty. But let's get this substance sorted out first and discuss that, and then move ahead and move on and make the changes that are necessary.
Both leaders dodged the question of whether Cameron's demands for changes to the EU treaty could be achieved before Britain holds a membership referendum. The British Prime Minister said he wants his country to stay in a reformed EU, but that nothing could be ruled out. All right, what do you have for us in sports today?
Yeah, well, we're going to tell you who's in and out at the French Open, but first we're a game closer to the NHL Championship. The Tampa Bay Lightning are heading to the Stanley Cup Finals. The Lightning beat the